For months, my roses just refused to bloom properly, no matter how much water or fertilizer I used. I even spent extra money trying different products, but nothing really worked. Meanwhile, my neighbor's garden looked completely different, full, bright, and covered in huge flowers. Then one day, I noticed something strange. She wasn't using expensive fertilizers at all. Just one cheap ingredient, costing less than $3. I decided to try the same thing, not expecting much. But by day 21, the change was impossible to ignore. My plants looked healthier, the leaves turned deeper green, and the flowers started blooming like never before. No matter what I did, my neighbor's flowers always looked better than mine. The colors were brighter. The blooms were larger. The plants looked calm and full of life. I tried everything I could think of. I watered more often. I bought expensive fertilizers. I followed advice from magazines and television. I spent more time bending, lifting, and checking on my plants than I probably should have. Still, her garden always seemed one step ahead. At first, I thought maybe she just had better soil. Or maybe she had more experience. But one afternoon, I noticed something that didn't quite make sense. She wasn't working in her garden nearly as much as I was. In fact, she often just walked through slowly, looking at her plants, not rushing, not adjusting things constantly. And yet, her flowers kept improving. That's when I became curious. Eventually, I asked her what she was doing differently. Her answer surprised me. It wasn't a special fertilizer. It wasn't a complicated schedule. It wasn't anything expensive or hard to find. It was just one simple mineral. Something that costs only a few dollars. Something many people already have at home. And she only used a small amount. What caught my attention even more was what she said next. She told me not to expect much in the first week. Or even the second. But around the third week, she said, things would begin to change. That felt strange at the time. We often expect quick results in the garden. But she spoke with quiet confidence, as if she had seen this pattern many times before. I decided to try it for myself. And what I noticed over time changed the way I look at gardening. Before explaining why this happened, it helps to understand how plants actually grow and what they truly need. When we look at a plant, we often focus on what we can see. The leaves. The stems. The flowers. But most of the important work happens quietly, inside the plant. Plants create their own food using sunlight. This process is called photosynthesis. It happens inside the leaves, where a green substance called chlorophyll captures light and turns it into energy. That energy allows the plant to grow, repair itself, and produce flowers. But here is something many gardeners overlook. Chlorophyll cannot function properly without certain nutrients. One of the most important of these is magnesium. Magnesium sits at the very center of the chlorophyll molecule. Without it, the plant cannot use sunlight effectively. So even if you water regularly, even if you add fertilizer, if magnesium is missing, the plant may still struggle. This is why some plants look pale or tired, even when they are being cared for. The leaves may lose their deep green color. Growth slows down. Flowers become smaller or fewer. It is not always a lack of effort. Sometimes it is simply a missing piece. Magnesium helps restore that balance. When a plant has enough magnesium, its leaves can capture sunlight more efficiently. This leads to stronger energy production. And when a plant has more energy, it can support more blooms, richer colors, and healthier growth overall. There is another part to this as well. The mineral often comes combined with sulfate, which helps improve how plants absorb other nutrients from the soil. So instead of replacing your current routine, it supports it. It helps everything else work better. This explains why my neighbor's garden looked so full without constant attention. She wasn't doing more work. She was simply giving her plants what they needed at the right time. Now, when I began using this method, I did not see immediate changes. And that is important to understand. Gardening often teaches patience. In the first week, I noticed only small differences. The leaves looked slightly greener. Not dramatically so, but enough to catch my eye. By the second week, something else began to happen. New growth started to appear. Small shoots formed where there had been none before. Buds began to develop quietly. It felt like the plants were waking up. Then, around the third week, I saw what my neighbor had described. The buds began to open. The colors looked deeper. The petals felt thicker and more structured. The flowers did not just appear, they seemed more confident, if that makes sense. By the end of the fourth week, the change was clear. The plants looked fuller. The blooms lasted longer. And the overall garden felt more balanced. What I appreciated most was that this change did not require constant effort. It came from understanding rather than overworking. Now, you may be wondering how to apply this in your own garden. The process is simple, and that is part of its appeal. You begin with a small amount of Epsom salt, which is another name for magnesium sulfate. Just 1 tablespoon is enough for a standard application. This is mixed into about 1 gallon of water. Warm water helps it dissolve more easily, but room temperature water can work as well if given time to mix. Once dissolved, the solution is poured gently around the base of the plant. There is no need to rush. No need to cover every inch. Just a calm, even application near the roots. This is usually done once every 2 weeks. That spacing allows the plant to absorb what it needs without becoming overwhelmed. It is worth noting that more is not always better. Plants respond well to balance. Too much magnesium can interfere with other nutrients, such as calcium, which are also important. So keeping the amount small and consistent is the best approach. Another helpful habit is to make sure the soil is slightly moist before applying the solution. Dry soil can make it harder for roots to absorb nutrients. A simple watering beforehand is often enough. If you grow tomatoes, there is an additional step that can be useful. When planting, a small amount of Epsom salt can be mixed directly into the soil where the roots will sit. This gives the plant early access to magnesium as it begins to establish itself. Tomatoes, along with peppers, tend to respond well because they require steady nutrient support to produce fruit. Roses are another plant that often show noticeable improvement. Their blooms can become more vibrant, and their petals more structured. Some houseplants also benefit, especially if their leaves show signs of yellowing between the veins. This pattern can sometimes indicate a lack of magnesium. At the same time, not every plant needs additional magnesium. Leafy greens, for example, often grow well without it. So it is helpful to observe your plants rather than apply the same treatment to everything. Gardening is not about doing more. It is about noticing more. There are also small variations depending on climate. In cooler regions, changes may appear more slowly. In warmer areas, growth may happen faster, but water management becomes more important. The method remains the same, but the timing may shift slightly. For those who prefer a faster response, there is another option. A more diluted solution can be sprayed lightly onto the leaves. Plants can absorb nutrients through their leaves as well as their roots. This is usually done in the early morning or late afternoon, when the sunlight is gentle. Spraying during the heat of the day can stress the leaves. Even with this method, a light touch is best. Over time, you may begin to notice patterns in your own garden. Some plants respond quickly. Others take longer. Some may not need the extra support at all. This is where gardening becomes more personal. Instead of following strict routines, you begin to respond to what you see. You may notice that a certain plant becomes greener after a single application. Or that another produces more buds after 2 weeks. These small observations guide your next steps. And this is what makes the process feel calm rather than demanding. There are also a few gentle cautions to keep in mind. Using too much can create imbalance, so it is best to stay within the simple guideline of 1 tablespoon at a time. Applying it to dry soil can reduce its effectiveness, so a little moisture beforehand helps. And using it only where needed allows the garden to stay balanced overall. Some gardeners also find that a small amount sprinkled around plants can discourage pests like slugs, as they tend to avoid rough surfaces. This can be a simple, chemical-free way to protect delicate leaves. Others use a light application when moving plants from pots into the ground. This can help reduce the stress that plants sometimes feel during transplanting. These are small additions, not requirements. The core idea remains simple. One small amount, used thoughtfully, can support the plant in a meaningful way. As the weeks pass, the changes often become more noticeable. Leaves take on a richer green tone. Stems appear stronger. Flowers open with more color and structure. And perhaps most importantly, the garden begins to feel easier to manage. Less guesswork. Less effort. More understanding. If you are comfortable sharing, I'm curious what plant you might try this on first. It could be a rose bush, a tomato plant, or even a small houseplant near a window. Each garden is different, and each experience adds something new. Over time, these small adjustments can lead to quiet improvements that feel both natural and satisfying. And that brings us back to where we started. Sometimes, the difference between a struggling garden and a thriving one is not how much we do, but how well we understand what the plant needs. A simple mineral. A small amount. A bit of patience. And the willingness to observe. Because in many cases, the garden does not need more effort. It simply needs the right support at the right time. And sometimes, the garden improves when we simply step back and observe.